in 3, 2, 1. We're back, and I'm with another Dr. J right now. Dr. Julie Schwartzbard is a board-certified neurologist in Aventura, Florida. She is also board-certified in brain injury medicine. Her clinical research includes Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and other neurological disorders. She's joining us to talk about her research with Eli Lilly and the future of treatments for Alzheimer's disease. And very importantly, for those of us here in New Jersey, she is from Wayne.
That's right.
Welcome. So we have been hearing that there are 70 million people currently living with Alzheimer's, and that number is expected to double or more in the next 35 years. Give us some hope.
Yeah, sure. Of course. So I think those are worldwide numbers, but look, up until a couple of years ago, I would not have really been able to say much that was hopeful. We had a couple of FDA-approved medications that didn't do a heck of a lot, but things have gotten pretty exciting in the last couple of years, thanks to pharmaceutical companies like Lilly and others who have brought new drugs to market. There is a new class of medication that attacks the abnormal protein in the brain that is thought to be a part of Alzheimer's disease. That protein is called beta amyloid. And these new medications go into the brain and drag that beta amyloid out of the brain. And in studies with this class of medications, patients often have the opportunity to do better longer. And this is very new in the Alzheimer's world.
This is treatment for people who are earlier into the process, correct?
That's right. This class of medication is approved for patients who have something called MCI, which stands for mild cognitive impairment. These are our forgetful patients who are still functioning normally, and also for mild Alzheimer's disease. And these patients are starting to lose functional independence. It really does seem that these medications work better the earlier we get them to people in the stage of the disease.
I'm going to take a step back because we talked in the previous interview about early signs of Alzheimer's, and those are the things that people can see. But you're able to diagnose maybe who's going to get it, who's at risk, and before there are any symptoms, right?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point that you're raising. This abnormal protein that I was just referring to called beta amyloid can collect in the brain years before the onset of symptoms, sometimes even upwards of 15 or 20 years. And so this amyloid can be seen either with a specialized PET scan or with a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture with cerebrospinal fluid analysis. And with those two diagnostic tests, we can see the presence of beta amyloid sometimes long before a patient presents with symptomatology.
And is there a difference between ways of dealing with that with these very, very early people versus people who are showing symptoms?
Well, we don't have any medications approved yet for patients who are not yet showing symptoms but are at high risk of the disease because of a positive PET scan or a positive CSF analysis. But there are drugs that are being studied in this patient population, and we are hoping down the line, not too far down the line, that we will see medication options for these patients.
So what's coming down the pike?
Probably more medications that will be attacking amyloid. We're expecting more of those. There's also another protein in the brain that abnormally can collect. It's called p-tau, or hyperphosphorylated tau. Tends to collect a little bit later than the beta amyloid. And there are anti-tau medications that are now being studied. There are also other classes of medications. We know in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease, there's a degree of inflammation, and this local process of inflammation is thought to be part of the disease process. And there are anti-inflammatory medications that are also being studied. There's also some really interesting non-pharmacologic treatment that's being looked into, including one that's almost like a virtual reality goggle that is hoping to excite the neurons and the neuronal circuit within the brain to help preserve those neurons so that they don't neurodegenerate, so they don't die out and cause Alzheimer's disease or worsen it.
That sort of thing, you hear about people doing, I don't know, crossword puzzles or things to sort of ward this off. Are there things people can do to stave it
Yeah,
off?
great question. So I wish I could tell you that it's sexy stuff, but it's diet and exercise, right? There's a particular diet called the MIND diet. It's a combination of the DASH diet for hypertension and the Mediterranean diet. That diet seems to be the healthiest for the brain. It's low in animal protein. So those of us who like to have our animal protein need to sort of, make that decision in terms of quality of life and prevention. But the brain really does prefer a diet that is low in animal protein and exercise. So many studies have been shown that patients who exercise regularly, that demographic, epidemiologically, they will have collectively less Alzheimer's disease, and those who are eating properly and exercising regularly and have Alzheimer's disease, many of them will have a slower course because of those efforts.
So crossword puzzles and other.
Okay. So yes, keeping the mind active is extremely important. I always like to remind patients that's the left brain. We've got the left brain and the right brain, and we can't forget about the right brain. So of course we recommend reading the newspaper, although these days I'm not sure how many people want to be reading the newspaper, but staying active in terms of puzzles, Sudokus, crosswords, things like that. But the right side of the brain, the creative side, also needs to be maintained. And there have been studies that have shown that if you maintain creative outlets, that also can help to prevent Alzheimer's or slow down the disease. Artistic endeavors, learning a musical instrument, learning another language, even gardening, anything that will help that creative spirit help out the right side of the brain and nourish that side is probably just as important as the puzzles.
That's good to know. I just failed at the Wordle today. So um, I wanted to talk about, and we did in the previous interview, the benefits of having a neurologist, because not all patients with Alzheimer's see a neurologist. And we did talk about the drugs that could be administered, and we didn't touch on the research part of that. So I was wondering if you could just sort of touch on that with current Alzheimer's
Sure.
patients who may be further along.
Sure. And look, I think it's important to see a neurologist. If you have a neurological problem, they're going to be at the top of their game in terms of latest available treatments and medications. But yes, participating in clinical research is extremely important. I tell my patients, you go home, you look in your medicine cabinet, all the medications you see there are there because patients participated in clinical research and because industry invested time and money into bringing these drugs to market. So if a patient has a neurological disease or is concerned about one, I would recommend they seriously consider participating in a clinical trial. And one way to make that happen often is by visiting a neurologist.
So this is in the news a lot today. A lot of these clinical trials are being affected by budget cuts from NIH and other sources. And I guess it's kind of an issue. Yours is going. The one I'm involved in from Parkinson's is also going because that's privately funded. But can you enlighten us a little bit about that?
Sure. Look, we know that a lot of institutions are losing their funding. But the good news is, the silver lining is that pharmaceutical companies, industry is still heavily invested in helping to cure diseases and to treat them. And I don't see that funding changing in the near future. We are participating in my office. We are participating in many different clinical trials with many different pharmaceutical companies, and we have not had any problems or decrease in funding or any news that there's going to be any problem continuing with these trials.
Do you look for any particular type of person to participate in a trial? Is it has to be somebody with a higher risk factor or just anyone in general?
Sure. So it depends on the disease process. Here, we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, and there are different medications that are being tested at just about every stage of the disease, including MCI, mild AD dementia, even moderate dementia. But even those patients we were talking about earlier, right? The ones who are preclinical we're very interested in seeing how they might respond to medications that have been approved already for Alzheimer's, and we're hoping we'll gain approval. Again, we want to get these patients as early as we can because the hope is the earlier we get them, the better and the more that we can help them.
That's great. So much to talk about as I said in the previous interview, but I'm going to let you go. And I want to thank you, Dr. Julie Schwartzbard. Matter of Mind, My Alzheimer's has already aired on PBS. It is available online for now. And after the online part expires, it'll be available on PBS Passport. And I hope everybody gets a chance to see it. I'm Karen Sachs. Again, Dr. J, thank you so much for joining us. And have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.